Welcome, everyone. We are here to talk to you about applied behavior analysis, also known as ABA, and its effects on autistic people and their families. This event is brought to you by One Bad Autistic, a Facebook group associated with the One Bad Mother fan group. The opinions expressed here are ours and ours alone, and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of One Bad Autistic or One Bad Mother groups, the One Bad Mother podcast, the show's hosts, or Maximum Fun. In this discussion, we are centering autistics and neurodivergent voices. My name is Tessa, I'm the host, and I am autistic. I have not been through formal ABA as a child, and one of my special interests is advocacy, as I have strong feelings about justice. So I brought these knowledgeable group of neurodiverse people together to help us learn more on this controversial topic. So let's get introductions out of the way. Who are you, and what is your relationship to autism? We'll go with Olex first. You're still muted.
Thank you, sorry. My name is Olex. I am also autistic. I am a former social worker, and I currently work with parents of autistic and neurodivergent children to help them figure out which resources they actually need and how to advocate for those resources.
Thank you. Shauna, you're currently muted.
Hi, I'm Shauna. My son is autistic and he went to ABA for a short while, and now we have moved on to some other therapies that I will go into later.
Right. Sam?
I'm Sam, and I am autistic. I have 3 autistic children, 2 of which
And Lauren.
Hi, my name is Lauren. I am a speech language pathologist. I currently work with the early intervention kiddos, so that's kids 0 to 3, and I have a lot of experience working with kids, autistic kids, and also working with ABA therapists. And I used to be an ABA therapist for a short while, a long, long time ago.
Thank you. All right, so the very first question. Autism advocates, often say ABA is abuse. So I think the burning question everyone wants to know is how and why ABA is abuse. So who wants to take that? Sam?
I could go a little bit. Part of the reasons why it's not recommended is the fact that it is very results-based and isn't really focused on the internal behavior of the children or the internal feelings of the children or the people who are in ABA. And it puts them through a lot of things regardless of their emotional state and pressures them to perform in a way that's very uncomfortable for them and to ignore their own internal boundaries and feelings in order to accommodate others rather than being authentic to themselves.
Okay, so it's like where, ABA wants people to change, not to kind of override their own internal judgment.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I can add on like an example of that if you'd like. When I'm talking to people about that natural instinct, I think, my natural instinct is to cry if something is upsetting to me. And so if I'm talking to somebody who's neurotypical, I can say, what's your natural instinct? And if it's to cry, I can explain that what ABA in my experience has shown is that they told my son, it's not okay to cry. You're not allowed to cry. The world doesn't accept you crying. And instead you have to do this. This is how you're supposed to express your emotions. And so that example, when I phrased it to people, they understood a little bit. It made sense to them. So that was just something I thought I'd share.
Yeah, it seems like there's also that little bit of like sexism going on, where like men aren't allowed to have their feelings, so they want to push your kid to act like a man. Oh, there's that. So a common counter argument that we hear when people say ABA is abuse, one of the first ones is, but not all ABA. So Olix, I know you have insightful perspective on this. Can you explain what that rebuttal means and how they can both be simultaneously true?
Sure. When we're talking about ABA, we're talking about what is typically offered to parents as services that their autistic child needs in order to survive. And there are a couple of barriers that I find that parents that I'm working with come up against. The biggest one being access to culturally appropriate therapies for their kids. Autism in and of itself does not require any special therapies. However, many autistic children benefit from speech therapy or occupational therapy. And their parents also benefit from speech therapy and occupational therapy. Often, access to those services outside of big ABA centers is incredibly difficult. Working parents have a difficult time accessing culturally appropriate services for their children because these services are offered during working hours. They can't take the time off to go to appointments every week. So ABA steps in and says, hey, we get that. Cool. We will take your kid for 40 hours a week. And we will provide the daycare, we'll provide them with all of the services. Your insurance is going to pay for everything. You don't need to worry about the cost. And a lot of times I find that single parents, working families, these are issues that they run into accessing services. Another thing, I'm currently working with a family who is living in a family shelter. It's a single mom. She has 8 children. 4 of her children are autistic. 2 of them are higher needs. Need a higher support than her neurotypical children. She is required to work 40 hours a week, and in order to keep her family housed, she is required to send them to the big ABA center in town. She doesn't have a choice. If she stops going, they will take away her health insurance. They will take away her access to housing, access to food, and she runs a real risk of having her children removed from her custody. So when I say not all ABA, I don't really mean not all ABA. ABA
My background's in marketing, so it sounds like we have facilities that are just an ABA facility, but they're also offering services that are not ABA. So when we say not ABA, it sounds like you're talking about those particular services. But when you're in a situation like some of your clients, they don't have that opportunity to opt out of those actual harmful services.
Exactly. And I know I'm also a parent of an autistic child. I know that looking for services, I want to say it was close to 2 years to find a speech therapist that we could work with. We are still looking for an occupational therapist. So finding those services and accessing those services outside of one-stop shop is a barrier as well.
Sam, you have something you wanted to add to that? Yeah. You're muted.
I want to say that specific legislation that states that insurance companies need to cover coverage for autistic people specifically states ABA, or it says ABA and other services, and so insurance corporations will only cover ABA. So it's very hard to find other services that are covered by insurance.
Yeah. And then Shauna, I know you wanted to say something too.
Yeah, I was just going to say what it sounds like, Olex, if I'm hearing correctly, is rather than it's not all ABA is bad, it's more not all circumstances allow for like other options. So not all situations maybe, it's because of the therapy itself, the treatment of ABA is not changing, right? It's the circumstances of the people who have their child in ABA, if I'm understanding correctly, more than the ABA itself.
Yeah, I would say that that's accurate. But I also am finding that, for example, the speech therapist that I see with my child used to work in ABA, and when you're coming into the field too, regardless of how you want to practice, this is where you're going to get your start. You're going to be supervised. These are the jobs that are available. And I find a lot, especially in speech therapy, a lot more practitioners breaking off and providing that more culturally competent service.
Yeah. So that's a great segue, Olex, because now I'm going to ask Lauren, can you explain to us like what is ABA from your perspective as someone who's actually practiced it, you've been trained in it, you know, and now that, and you've told me that you see that it's now abusive. So can you explain that to me from your perspective? Like I want to hear all of this information.
Of course. So ABA is, it's a lot of things, but a lot of people think about the discrete trials of ABA. So that's where you're sitting at a table and there's reinforcement and consequence. If you do what the instructor wants, then you get a reinforcement. And if you don't, you're told to try again. And keep working for that reinforcement. And discrete trials have a certain number of objectives that the child needs to do. It's entirely adult-led. If the child, if there's something else that the child desires or needs that the child has, newer ABA is trying to accommodate those. But typically in discrete trial, it's going to be, let's sit down and drill and practice and then take a break. ABA can also be on the floor, early start Denver model. I think in an attempt to make it appear more like floor time or other ABA or other autism treatments out there, they make it seem more child-led, more play-based. However, it still is working all of the ABA branches. There's a ton of ABA branches that look different than what some people think of as ABA, but it's all from the same mindset of reinforcement and consequence, and the ABC, antecedent, behavior, and consequence, meaning that something happens, the child does a behavior like throwing something or not listening to you or not looking at you. There's a reason for that. So that's antecedent. What I just said was the behavior. And then afterwards it's a consequence. So that's what the teacher does. Do they say, no, try again? Do they say quiet hands? Do they say, look up at me, I'll give you an M&M? So even if it's on the floor and it seems child-based and it seems like it's fun, it's still coming from this mindset of instructional control, which essentially means coercion. You're coercing a child to do what you want them to do without really thinking about the child's needs, without thinking about what the child has to gain. It's really important to think about the why bother. What's the why bother for the child? What's in it for them long term? What's their motivation? And in ABA, I think to summarize it, they focus on reinforcement over internal motivation.
Yeah, there was, I recently attended a disability and mental health summit, and there was some practitioners that had explained like, well, if our kid is looking out the window and we want them to pay attention, we're just going to move their seat. And I had asked, as like a comment, like, why is it bad to move them away? Like, why is looking out the window a bad thing? And they weren't able to give me an answer. So is there, I guess my question is like, when we have parents that they're bringing their kids to these therapies or these services, I'm going to call them like, businesses, because it's like $1 billion industry here. It is huge. There's a lot of money to be had to be a BCBA. So and I started losing my thought because I went off on a tangent there. Gosh, what was I literally saying like 2 seconds ago?
The window.
Yes, out the window.
A lot of money to be made. It's $1 billion industry.
Gosh, but I had a really good question. Now I forget.
Maybe you had to explain to parents who,
yeah. I guess the question is like, these, the client for these businesses, it's not the child. The client, again, from my marketing background, the client is the parent. So I imagine the business is probably saying, so how do you want to design your child today? What behaviors do you want to see improved? Do you want your kid looking out the window? No, we can stop that. Do you want your kid to give you eye contact? We can give you that too. Design a child here. Because I think that was even in, gosh, that's bringing me back to another roundabout tangent. What was it? Ole, his name, Ivar Lovas. I think he even, when he was founding ABA, he has like this ridiculous quote about, you don't have a person, you're building a person. And that's kind of what it is. Like if you have an autistic child, you take, and oh my gosh, okay, I'm going too much on tangent, too much talking from the moderator. All right, Sam, I see you have your hand up. Did you have anything you wanted to add? It's okay if we go back in time because time is irrelevant to me.
Yeah, I wanted to say that like even in places where they have like a set list, or once your child has mastered this, it's time to move on to this, which is what happened in our case for sure. Like it didn't take into account the child's specific needs. Like specifically my child, who is an ABA pathologist, also has an intellectual disability. But in preschool, they were spending several hours a day working on, say, like sight word flashcards, which is not something that was age appropriate, and especially not developmentally appropriate for him. But it was the next thing on their list to work on. And so there was like this driving thing to move on forward, and we finished this task. What can we do next to fix it?
Your child's the product of their business. Parents are the client.
And I really liked what you brought up, Sam, where it's the next thing on the list. It's following a pre-designed program and you're crossing it off the list. So back when I was an ABA therapist when I was in undergrad and graduate school. And as Olex brought up, it is common for speech therapists to go into that route if we have an interest and a desire to help autistic children. It's something you can get into while you're in school. And when I was an ABA therapist, I was under the leadership of a BCBA who essentially said, Lauren, you're going to do XYZ exactly like this. And if I didn't do it exactly as the BCBA wanted, I was criticized. So I remember we were working on, field of 3, choose one. And I kind of was like, you know what, like, I bet I could teach this in a more fun way instead of just testing, because really ABA discrete trial is literally testing, and it's not actually teaching. I was like, let me show them and let me talk about it and let me expand on it. And I remember the BCBA observed me and she's like, Lauren, you're doing it wrong. You have to do it like this. This is the right way. And in a way, I was also getting ABA therapy like that right and that wrong constantly being told to you, which is another reason why I realized how upsetting and damaging it is to be always told that's right, that's wrong. black or white, this is the way to do it, when really every child is unique and different, and they shouldn't just be following one manual.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I've even read on some of these websites, they'll say like, yeah, we'll personalize and individualize your plan, but it's really just, it's kind of what we advocate when we say, where are you on the spectrum? There is no point. You're more like that equalizer for audio. So it's like, where's your strengths and your weaknesses? If you're weak in eye contact and talking to people, then those are the services that you'll get. So that's the personalization. But otherwise, how they go about teaching them to you, it sounds like it's already pre-planned. Blah. I can't say the word. Just gonna skip it. You'll never hear it from me. Okay, so Shauna, I want to hear from you. So some parents they praise ABA for teaching their kid how to talk or teaching them how to use their body, but both of those things can be done without ABA. I think we've covered that pretty in depth, and those things can be covered by going to like someone like Lauren or Olix, speech language.
Yeah, I got it.
Language pathologist. It's now a stubbornness. I need to be able to say these words. Or an occupational therapist. Shauna, since you recently pulled your child from ABA, can you tell us what led to that decision?
Yes, it was a few things. I made sure to keep my notes. But it was, from the beginning, it was a little bit tricky because I had moved across the country, and so I was new somewhere, and I got my son into a preschool, and he was just turned 2-ish at that time, and he was doing really well in preschool. And the reason I even sought out any sort of therapy for him, which now I will call it ABA treatment, it's not therapy. I don't refer to it as therapy, but at the time I was seeking out ABA treatment because he banged his head a lot. And so he would bang his head for up to 5 hours a night. And it was, not only was he not sleeping, he was hurting himself, and he didn't have good places to bang his head. And for me, I've never seen that before. And so to me, it was like, this is a problem, and my kid's not sleeping. And so ABA told me, like, yeah, we'll fix that for you. We'll get him to stop head banging. And to me, it sounded great. I was like, awesome, because it's not good for him to be doing this. So if you can fix that, which I wouldn't use that term now, but at the time, that was like what I was saying would be awesome. And I don't know, it just kind of over time, there was like some hesitation, and I started working with occupational therapists, and then I had a speech therapist as well, and I was getting conflicting information from speech, occupational, and the pediatrician would all tell me one thing, and then I would go to the BCBA, and she would tell me another thing. So the BCBA is on the ABA side, and she would tell me something else. And then I would say, but all these people say this, and then she would kind of backtrack and say, oh yeah, that's, and so it led to a kind of like a mistrust for me, where I was thinking, if you're going to flip like that, then I maybe shouldn't trust what you're like saying to me. So there were a few things, but one of them, they wanted me to pull him from preschool so that he could do ABA, which everyone else in his life was saying, no, if he's thriving at preschool, please let him be around other kids if he can handle it. And he could, and it was doing, like, he loved it. He loved preschool. So there were those things. And then, ABA wanted me to completely stop his stimming, which is what I found out it was, but didn't know at the time. My OT educated me on what stimming was, and that it was just for his self-regulation, and there are safe ways for him to do it. And so she said, go get a rocking chair, and in his room set up a pad, so at night he's banging against something soft. So it goes back to that question that you guys were saying earlier of like, why, which now I question everything. Like if a teacher or an adult or anything says, he needs to be sitting while he eats or anything like that, I say, why can't he wander to the window? Why can't he move around a little bit? What's the harm? And that is really what I didn't ask with the BCBA when I was in ABA. And so there was no education there. It was just, here, we'll fix all the problems of your child. And like you guys, as you all spoke about before, you were saying that there's always something more. So there was always like new goals. And I wasn't even asking for this. I just wanted him to stop hurting himself. But then ABA always had new goals. So yeah, there were just things over time. And then when OT was telling me basically exactly what he needed and how we can help him get what he needs so that he is able to rock, because that's what she told me to be a vestibular input need. So his body moving back and forth, it wasn't even about the head banging. Then it allowed me to get him a swing where he could move his body back and forth in a rocking chair, and like things that helped, and give him the space to do what he needed to do. And then my trust was just lost with ABA, with the misinformation and not educating me, and then the autistic community educating me and giving me incredible articles. And then I don't know, when you learn too much, it's like, then there's no way I could go back. Like there's no way I could go back to ABA at this point. So
yeah, I feel like, because you've told me that story before about with the rocking chair, and that got me thinking the other day, like when I was really upset because there was like this loud construction noise, and I'm just like, I can't focus. I was just I felt like I had a lot of energy and like I couldn't dissipate it. And I'm thinking like, what about rocking? I have a recliner in my toddler's chair. She mentioned the rocking, like, let me just go try it out. Maybe there's something to this. So I just rocked in the chair, and like, this is amazing. So like, even if you're not autistic and you're pissed off, go in a rocking chair and calm down, because
there's a reason there's a reason they exist, right? People like the feeling. So
okay, so Sam, did you want to tell us your story, or do you just have something to add to here?
Yeah, I wanted to add that ABA doesn't really focus on meeting the needs of the child. Like if the child was like your child was banging, and you can meet that need in an appropriate way by giving them a less harmful way, by giving them an outlet to be able to meet that need, like that would serve the purpose better than just pretending like that need doesn't exist and trying to get them to like mask or cover up the fact that they have needs that they are not being met.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I've even read on some of these websites, they're like, we'll make your kid indistinguishable from their peers. And it's like, why?
Yes, actually, I had somebody tell me that was part of the marketing of it, not from the company, but from a parent who had put their child through. Said he was first diagnosed at 2 years old, and he's 6 now. And if he were to get evaluated again, he wouldn't even be diagnosed. And it was like a big excitement thing. And now I look back at that with a different lens, for sure. I look back at that interaction through a different lens.
So Sam, this question is for you. I know you have 3 kids, and that the 2 youngest ones were in ABA, and they both started when they were 18 months old. Is that right? And then the older one was in it for years, while your youngest one was only in it for 6 months.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, what changed? Why did you decide to pull your children out of ABA after all that time?
It became like, in the beginning, my oldest son is autistic, but he was born in 2003, and we had the hardest time getting any kind of services for him, because it was all, I can see where he was struggling, and they'd say, no, it was fine. Kids, it happens to that all the time. So when my second son also had some really significant developmental delays, I went to early intervention, and I was surprised that they actually said, yes, of course, we can get you services. And I was like, yes, finally someone is listening to me and they can see that my child is struggling. And so we entered the program, and it was right as my third child was born. So I was in the newborn forest, and I was just waking up and taking care of my baby and cleaning the house, because we did in-home ABA where we had strangers in our home for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And so like I was just lost in the let's just get it done, let's get it done. And it took me a while for my oldest son to realize, because at the time my middle son, he had no communication, he couldn't point. And I was so scared at the implications that he would, like, if something was wrong, that he would never be able to tell us that something was wrong. And these people were offering us help, and they were offering us more help than I thought that we'd be able to get. And so we went forward with that. And then I was starting to emerge from the fog of the everyday of, you know, constantly taking care of like a high needs child and moving forward, I started like noticing that like it was really stressful on him. Like some days, like we'd be done with ABA and he would just like fall asleep on any kind of flat surface that was nearby, because it was just exhausting. He was just, you know, 3 years old, and he was just running through flashcards, or he was constantly going through things. And I remember I was taking videos at the time because like he was making so much progress, and I didn't see his distress. And looking back, I can obviously see his distress, where he would do what he was told, and they'd reward him with like 30 seconds of a TV show that he liked, and then like they would block it and take it away, and like he never got to just do the things that made him happy or do the things that made him relax. And as we completed one goal and then the next, like there was always another goal, there was always something that we were pushing towards and trying to do, and it was just too much. And with my third child, she was at the same level that her brother was at about 18 months, where she wasn't speaking and she wasn't pointing, and she would actually be considered a success in ABA, because she did ABA for about 6 months and she was speaking in sentences by the end of it. But I don't feel like it was because of ABA. I feel like that was just her developmental milestone. Like she doesn't like to try something unless she feels like she's mastered it, because that's just how she is. So when she started talking, you know, you've heard all these stories of these famous people who are like, oh, Einstein didn't talk till he was 3, and then suddenly he was talking in sentences. And I feel like she would have just been the same way. She would have developed in her own time, and we didn't have to put her through that. And like especially when they started in on the flashcards with my older son with the sight words, and they were like, they said like he knew like 120 sight words and he can do the things, but then when he went to school he couldn't, because it was only specifically in that program, and like he was being like, he knew how to perform for them, but he didn't internalize anything, and it was just all just trying to get them to stop so that he can have his rest, so that he can have his 5 minutes of peace at the end of his session or his break. And it was heartbreaking, and it was too much, and we had to stop.
I think you explained that really well. It's the results of ABA is performative. You know, they're not actually learning those skills. You know, they're not. When people, you know, I know eye contact is one of the most common things. You know, so when we say like, you know, making eye contact, you know, it's why is that why does that matter? Gosh, I had a thought and it left again. Yeah, shit, I'm so sorry about like that. That must have been distressing, you know, and like and to have that weight come on you at the end, because like you said, you didn't see it in the time. And I imagine a lot of parents are feeling this, when they come to autistic communities after being in their autism mom communities, they're probably like, oh my gosh, I'm an abuser. I can't be an abuser. It's a hard thing to come to terms with, to feel like you've done your kid dirty, so to speak. It's especially if, because it's also, as Oleg's pointed out, it's privilege to be able to take your kid out of ABA. It's privilege to get your kid in ABA. It's messed up. Is what it is. I don't know how to sum that up any easier. Oh crap. All right, so I'm gonna make everybody feel like crap with this last question. This is so this last question, I want to answer myself to begin with. Without going into detail, I suffer from complex PTSD, a result from childhood trauma. Child abuse can take the form of neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, and medical neglect. So the question that I'm going to answer is, aren't some of the ABA techniques just parenting? Why is it labeled abuse when a BCBA does it? And it's hard. I want to say, like, it's hard for me to answer this because I love my mom, I love my family, and I don't want to say my family's abusers because I have to say it with a funny laugh, otherwise it's real. It's thing is, it is parenting. If your parents, gosh, I was actually up at 2:30 in the morning, and I wrote all this down because I just couldn't sleep the night before. So I wanted to kind of relate this to the spoon theory. The spoon theory was a way that someone, I forget her name, but she used it to explain, like, using your mental energy throughout the day, that disabled people have to think ahead, plan ahead, otherwise they might not be able to do everything they want to do in that day. Because it's hard to just stand up in the shower if you have a disability that affects fatigue and being able to stand up. And I wanted to extrapolate that and say, like, a lot, like, the spoon theory can apply to most any marginalized person, because they're spending day in and day out living in a world that doesn't validate them. So that takes up a lot of spoons to constantly be correcting people if they pronounce your name wrong, to constantly, fighting discrimination, the way your body looks, the way you act, the way you behave. There's so many things that spoons have. So when you are a parent and you are low on spoons, you tend to make the choices that will take less spoons. And if you're driving home at the end of a day and your kid's screaming in the back of the car, the easy path, if you don't want to say yes, if you don't want to indulge them in whatever it is they're asking for, the easy thing to do is to ignore them. And ignoring them once because you're low on spoons, if it's like a one-time situation, that's okay. We've all been ignored before. We know how it feels. It's kind of crappy. But when you get ignored every single day, and this is an ABA technique called attention extinction, where they actually instruct you as the parent to do planned ignoring of your child when they're behaving in a way that you don't want them to do. When you get ignored every single day, you start to feel unheard, unseen, and maybe even unloved. These were specific examples that in this child welfare government document said withholding attention was an example of emotional maltreatment. And part of that is, you can experience all of these things. Like, one time ignoring somebody probably isn't going to cause them emotional long-term damage, but it's the repetitiveness of it that will cause that emotional long-term damage. And that's what it was for me. I didn't go through formal ABA because my mom, she didn't know what ABA was. My family, they didn't know what ABA was. We were not privileged. We grew up below the poverty level. She's a single mom. I don't know where my dad is. It was there was a lot of emotional trauma throughout my childhood, and it's something that I've been coming to terms with in my own counseling, in my own therapies, and it's something that I feel slightly more comfortable talking about. I'm at least, you know, I don't know where I land with that, but the point is that, you know, when we say, you know, aren't these techniques just parenting? They are they? You know, I guess that's
Yeah.
the question I'm asking. Like, you know, it like, is this the tool in your toolbox that you want to go and reach for every time, or is it just something you use on occasion?
Yeah.
And it's, yeah.
For a while, I saw ABA as kind of a necessary evil, whereas, say, your child, if you thought your child wasn't drinking 8-ounce glasses of water every day and you decided to forcibly give them an IV, that would obviously be abuse, like obviously. But if your child was in a state where they were dehydrated and they were unable to drink, it would not be abuse because it would be medical attention. But the line is with ABA and behavioral interventions, like I wanted him to be able to communicate, even if he could, like my son, even if he couldn't talk, I wanted him to be able to point and to be able to answer yes or no if I asked him if he was hurt. And that seemed like an emergency to me, and it required emergency intervention. But then over time, he did learn to communicate, and the level of intervention didn't decrease. It just kept on, and it was still in that state of emergency and intensive intervention that wasn't appropriate for the level that he was functioning at. And then it became less about being able to function and more about being able to blend in, or to more just fit in the square peg of a kindergarten classroom, rather than meeting his needs and doing what was best for him.
Yeah. Everybody deserves a right to communication. You know, we shouldn't have this ridiculous ableist, you know, focus on mouth words. You know, if your kid can't speak, we used baby ASL for my daughter, and you know, she was able to sign back to us at 9 months old, and I was taken aback. I'm thinking like 9-year-olds or not, yeah, 9-year-olds, 9-month-olds clearly don't know what they want. You know, they can't talk. I've never heard of babies being able to tell me things before, and here she is. She's like, I want some milk. Give me some more. You know, I'm just like, dang girl, like you know what you want at 9 months old. You have opinions on things that early on. You know, this is what we mean by, you know, presumed competence, because they know, they just can't say it, you know. And she was pre-verbal. There's, you know, plenty of other kids out there that, you know, speak fluently with devices, ASL. You know, I do these video chats weekly with other groups of OBM, and I am just, one of our members, they have a kid who uses this device, and I'm just like, I've never seen that before. Like, this is diversity for me. This is normalizing it for me to just see this kid exist with their device and able to have communications. Like, and like this kid doesn't say a word out of their mouth, but they have this device that is very, very fluent, and the parent, like, they're just so wonderfully responsive to this. And I'm like, wow, like they really know what they're doing over here. Like they figured it out. They figured out what helps their kid communicate. And we need more of that. We need more parents like that OBM right there. You know who you are.
And if it's okay for me to chime in as well. So like
Mhm.
that line between, is this normal parenting or can it be abusive? You know, that line. I think for me, if something's icing on the cake, you know, then it's okay. So like with potty training, most people I know use some sort of reinforcement for potty training. They'll say, oh, if you go on the potty, I'll give you a special treat, or we'll go get ice cream or something, you know? And the thing is though, that kid has to already be mentally motivated to go on the potty. They have to be interested, curious. What's this all about? They have to be successful at least a few times. They have to not be afraid of it. They have to be warmed up to the idea, but they're just kind of like, yeah, I mean, if it's all the same, I guess I'd rather just play on the floor and just go in my diaper. Oh, I'm going to get a treat. Well, then sure, that sounds great. So they've already met, they're already there. They're already, that's just sweetening the deal. And sometimes we do that for ourselves. Like, oh, I don't want to have to stay up till 10 p.m. finishing my day job stuff. But you know what? Sometimes I treat myself and I'll say, after I'm done, I'm going to have a glass of wine and it'll be nice. But I already am motivated. There's already a why bother. What's really damaging is when the only reason a child is doing something is for the reinforcement. Like Sam, your story was really enlightening. It's something that I've seen a lot as well with the flashcards, with just trying to get those 5 minutes of just trying to get that break. So they're just going through it just for the break and just because they're trying to avoid it. It's not sweetening the deal. They're not at all there. They're only doing it. The only reason is the reinforcement. So sometimes I try to explain that to people that's kind of that fine line difference.
I have two examples that I just had to quickly write down because I think it was, oh gosh, I don't know how long ago. I don't have a sense of time, so I could say last week is the same as 2 months ago. I don't know. I'm gonna go with 2 months ago because that seems reasonably far away. So 2 months ago, I did something that I felt like I felt bad for. Like, I think it was just that I went grocery shopping. Oh, you know what? It was for Easter. Because I remember the whole reason why. Okay, so it was around Easter time, and I thought I should get a chocolate bunny because that was something that we liked to get. And I just looked at the bunny. I'm like, let's get this bunny. It's the last one on the shelf. Why not? Bought the bunny. Came home. Turns out it was a really expensive bunny. I didn't like the price of it. Didn't cross my mind. And I'm like, ugh. So like that's pretty normal for me. I tend to like get too focused on something that I don't look at other things. So like the whole time I was shopping. So anyway, I come home with this bunny and my partner, he's just like, that is a lot more than I would have spent on a bunny. And I just was like, oh, and something happened in my mind where I needed to punish myself. And a lot of that was that I just didn't eat the next day. Basically, I withheld food because I'm just like, I was so depressed that I'm just like, I don't deserve food. I deserve to feel the pain of hunger because that was one thing I could control. And it was just, and I'm 30 years old. Like, why am I doing this to myself? That's what PTSD does. It manifests in ways like this because of things that happened probably when I was a child, that I was punished. More than one time I had to go to bed without eating dinner because I didn't like it. I was considered a picky eater. Turns out it's probably actually acrid because I cry at the smell of fish, but that's another story for another time. But these things stick with you. That's what adults told me was appropriate to happen when I did something wrong. And now as an adult, like, I punished myself. Like, I didn't consent to that. Really, I don't want to be, but who wants to be punished? Like, it's messed up. That's and then the other example, literally just last week, I was meeting somebody for an important meeting, and they sent me directions, and it was like, let's go to 123 Example Drive. And I pull it up on my Google Maps and I'm like, okay, this is in a shopping district. I don't think the person lives here. And I thought, well, maybe I should go there anyway. Why would I question their directions? They're the person who knows where it's at. I need to trust them. I need to assume, I defer to them. I assume that they're correct. So I went ahead and I thought, like, maybe there was an apartment building I wasn't aware of. I was vaguely familiar with this area. So I went there, ended up in a church parking lot. They're definitely not here. That was not where the meeting was. So I ended up texting like, oh, it's, like, oh, my bad, it was, Example Road, not Drive. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, that's at least residential. Went there 20 minutes late to a meeting, whatever. Fortunately, they're really reasonable. But the point is that I had that gut feeling that said, maybe this isn't right. And I've been taught that my gut feelings don't matter, that I need to trust implicitly other people because I'm the dumbest person in the room. So I guess that ends that sentence. Yeah, so if there's any last comments, I guess we can wrap that up. That was all the questions that I had. What do you got for me?
I was just going to answer the last question. I don't think I have a good answer for it really, but I can say that my son is my first child and he's not even 3. And so when it comes to, is an ABA just parenting, it's hard for me to really answer because I feel like I'm still a new parent, and maybe it is just parenting for some people, but there are also a lot of things, a lot of parenting styles or choices that I wouldn't make and I refuse to make. And so it's hard to say, just because we all make our own choices and we all have our own comfort zones. But what I will say is if I flip that a little bit, what it's done to me to look at the way that I'm raising my son through the lens of being anti-ABA for myself and for my son, I'm really using why all the time. So I'm really, if somebody suggests that he doesn't have boundaries, I sit there and I think about it and I'm like, when did I learn boundaries? Like at what age did I actually learn boundaries? And the answer is probably when I was an adult, probably not when I was 2 years old, probably not when I was 2.5 years old. So like my expectations of him are what society has imposed on me or I've taken from society. And then I start to think you need to have an understanding of why a boundary is in place in order to comply with it. Otherwise, it's just doing it because you don't want the reaction if it's negative, right? So I'm just challenging a lot the things I'm doing as a parent because I've learned through other parents or through society that that's how you do it. And I'm challenging it in my head and saying, maybe it's not the right way. Maybe this is not what's going to work for my son. And so having that experience with ABA and feeling just such a visceral reaction to the things that I felt were really negative for him have just allowed me to look through a different lens, I think, at my parenting style in general, which is not like, no, it's not ABA. Like it's very different than ABA. But I also like what you said, Lauren, where it's when everything else is met, and that's just, the reward is the icing on the cake. Or if I just don't have any spoons left, which happens, and I'm like, I know the only way you're going to let me change your diaper is if you're also eating a cracker at the same time, and I can't. I'm full for the day. Like I need you to change your diaper. I need to change your diaper. Like, of course there are those times, but principally and on a regular basis, I try not to practice those things.
Yeah, it's so hard being a parent. We all have these preconceived notions of what we're going to do when we're parents. And I don't have a follow-up to that.
I think we were all excellent parents before we had kids. Something that all of you have kind of touched on in talking about ABA techniques being just parenting. If you spend time in autistic-led spaces, especially when it comes to talking about autistic children, something that you hear, well, there are a few, but one of the things that stands out to me is, your child is not giving you a hard time. Your child is having a hard time. And that shift in thinking is completely glossed over in ABA. but that shift in thinking is what allows in my opinion, what allows the quite come up with the goals is, I think, the closest word I can come up with, the goals of ABA. It allows it to shift from abusive to affirming. You know, and again, ABA just ignores the why are you having a hard time and focuses on the stop giving your teacher a hard time, stop giving your parents a hard time.
Yeah. Yeah, that one I know. Yeah, because you often, I say you, this is me projecting, you often feel like you're the burden on everybody else because you know that's the language they're using. You are giving them a hard time. Sorry, I'm giving you a hard time. And I over apologize. I think before this meeting, I apologized like 20 times for like every little thing I was doing. And that's just because it's bred into me.
My son, who was
you
in
know,
ABA the longest,
yeah.
he apologizes, and he's a lot more anxious than my other kids. I mean, he comes quite honestly. I'm also a very anxious person, but he, to the point where like, let's go get ice cream, and he's like, do we have money for ice cream? It's like, yes. Like mom and dad said yes, like you don't have to worry about it. Like
He's 6 and worried about money.
Yeah. It's like we're going out, we're having fun, and we never talk about money in front of him or anything like that. And we're actually in a very comfortable place right now. But like he just, like, I don't know, like he finds like he has to overthink everything and make sure that everything is in place so that we can go and do this fun thing, or so we can have this fun thing, or like when we went on vacation last, his sister's like, I want this and I want this candy, and he was like, I don't know. He says, no, I don't want to spend your money. It's like, it's your money, buddy, like go pick out what you want. And like, I don't know, like he's always worried about what everybody else is going to feel, or what the consequences are for like every bit of happiness or joy that he has. And like, I just, like, that's the difference between the three kids. He was the one who was in it the longest, and he just, it wasn't good, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny that one of the, I say funny, it's funny, one of those stereotypes is that, you know, autistic people are completely self-centered and so internal and completely oblivious to situational awareness. Yet it sounds like your son is hypersensitive to everyone around him and hyper aware of his effect on people. Just gonna like sit in the silence for a moment because that's sad. That's really sad. All right. Oh, well, I don't want to cry, so I think we're done for today. You know, I would love to invite you guys back another time, and we can talk about alternatives to ABA. You know, how, you know, now that we know that ABA sucks and all ABA sucks, all that is actually ABA sucks, what can we do instead? So I think that, you know, these are some important questions. How can we actually help autistic children and autistic adults that have suffered from ABA, whether formal, informal? You know, it has an impact on not just the kid, but it's got the impact on our families, grandparents, friends. You know, as you said, your kid is hyper aware of everybody they meet and is so concerned over everyone else's feelings. I mean, that, like, I have that rejection sensitive dysphoria, RSD. Like, I'm so afraid of people hating me and saying the wrong thing. And because I can't understand I don't hear my tone, and I usually can't pick up on other people's tones, I'm so afraid that I'm going to offend someone on accident, you know, let alone on purpose. You know, so it's just all right. You guys are all doing a good job. Thank you.
You're doing a good job too, Tessa. Thank you.